James Haller had lived long enough to know that the desert had a strange way of testing a person's soul. Some nights it felt like a mirror reflecting the quiet corners of his heart, and other nights it felt like an enormous hand pressing on his chest, reminding him how small he was in the grand scheme of things. But on the night when the sky was moonless and the wind moved like a whispering ghost through the dry brush, James felt something different, something watching him from the darkness just outside the reach of his porch lantern. He leaned forward in his old rocking chair, his boots scraping the wooden planks beneath him, when he saw a shape. At first he thought it was a horse or maybe a wandering coyote, but the shadow was too large, too tall, and too silent. It moved with a heavy grace, like a storm materializing on 2 feet. James stiffened, blinking into the darkness as the figure stepped into the lantern's dim glow, and what he saw knocked the breath from his chest. It was a woman, an Apache woman, but unlike any he had ever imagined or heard of in the frontier tales. She was towering, impossibly tall, her shoulders broad as if carved from the same ancient stone as the mesas behind the ranch. Her long black hair hung in thick waves down her back, dusted with sand and streaked with exhaustion. Her face was fierce and beautiful, the kind of face that carried centuries of struggle, wisdom, and the burden of a people's survival. But her lips were cracked, her breathing uneven, her eyes pleading in a way that reached straight past James's instincts for caution and stirred something deeply human in him. She swayed slightly. She was thirsty, dangerously thirsty. And in that moment, despite every rumor the settlers whispered about Apache warriors, despite every fear the frontier carved into a man's survival instincts, James felt only compassion. Without speaking, he grabbed the wooden bucket beside the well, lowered it into the cool darkness, and pulled up fresh water. He carried it toward her slowly, giving her space, letting her decide whether to trust him. She didn't speak. She simply knelt, her enormous frame shaking with fatigue, and lifted the bucket with hands that could have snapped it in two had she not been so desperate for the life it held. She drank deeply, until the trembling in her limbs eased and her breath steadied. Then she looked at James with an expression he could not decipher, something between gratitude and grief, like she had been carrying the weight of a world he knew nothing about. Before he could say a word, she turned and walked back into the darkness. No explanation, no farewell, just gone, swallowed by the desert like a vision. James went to sleep unsure whether he had witnessed reality or a dream woven from loneliness. But when dawn broke, when the pale edge of sunlight crept across the ranch, he stepped outside and felt the earth vibrate beneath his boots. At first he thought it was thunder. Then he saw them, 399 Apache warriors encircling his ranch in a perfect ring, silent, still, resolute. Their spears glinted in the rising sun, their horses snorted softly, their painted faces unreadable. James's throat tightened. He wasn't armed, he wasn't ready, and he had no idea what offense, real or imagined, might have brought an entire battalion upon him. Then the ring parted. The giant woman walked forward, no longer weak but standing tall and commanding, her presence sending a ripple of awe through the warriors behind her. Her deep-set eyes settled on James with a power that made him feel both exposed and protected at the same time. When she spoke, her voice rolled like thunder across the sand. "You gave life to one who carries the burden of many," she said. "And our people do not forget such a gift." James blinked, stunned. She continued, "I am Nahaya, last sentinel of my tribe. The desert nearly claimed me last night, after a journey to warn my people of great danger. When my strength failed, it was your water that saved me." She stepped closer, and James instinctively stepped back, though not from fear, more from the sheer magnitude of her presence. Nahaya placed a staff carved with ancient symbols at his feet. "By our law," she said, "the man who saves the sentinel becomes kin to the tribe. Protected, honored, guarded with our lives." The warriors behind her lowered their spears as one. James, overwhelmed, shook his head. "I didn't do anything heroic," he whispered. "You needed water. I had water. That's all." Nahaya's eyes softened. "Kindness is never small," she replied. "Not when a heart chooses it over fear." The moment held a warm stillness, like sunlight settling gently on cold ground. But then Nahaya's expression shifted, clouded by a shadow that felt larger than everything around them. "There is more," she said quietly. "The danger I fled has followed us here." Before James could respond, a young Apache boy, no older than 16, rode through the warriors and halted in front of Nahaya. "Mother," he said urgently, "they have found our tracks." James looked at the boy, startled. Nahaya's son. The resemblance was unmistakable in the sharp lines of his face and the fire in his eyes. The boy turned to James. "You helped her," he said. "Now we must help you." James felt confusion twist inside him. "Help me? From what?" Nahaya crouched slightly so her eyes met his. "From a threat older than the fences around your home," she said. "A shadow that feeds on fear, division, and bloodshed between our people and yours. It hunts me, and in saving me, you stepped into its path." The ground trembled again, but this time James felt something else, coldness, a distant, rumbling malice. Nahaya's massive hand landed lightly on his shoulder, surprisingly gentle. "But do not fear," she said. "You are not alone." What followed was a moment James would remember for the rest of his life. The warriors dismounted, forming a protective circle around him, as if declaring that no harm could cross their boundary. James felt something shift inside him, a cracking open of old beliefs, old fears, old divisions. These people were strangers to him yesterday. Yet here they stood today, offering their lives for his. Not because he was powerful, not because he was important, but because he had offered kindness without hesitation, without judgment, without expecting anything in return. That was the unexpected turn his day, his life, had taken. The realization that compassion did not just ripple, it returned like a tidal wave, larger and stronger than before. As the distant rumble grew louder, Nahaya moved to stand beside James, towering like a living shield. "Whatever comes," she said, "you face it with us." And James, who had lived years behind quiet isolation and dusty routines, felt something warm and fierce ignite in his chest. Belonging, purpose, humanity shared across two worlds. When the threat finally arrived, dark shapes cresting the distant ridge, carrying ill intent and old hatred, the warriors surged forward in unity, their cries echoing across the desert. But before conflict could touch the land, Nahaya raised her staff high, and the rising sun caught its carvings, flooding the battlefield with brilliant golden light. The attackers faltered, blinded, overwhelmed, yet what truly stopped them was not force, but the sight of the sentinel standing beside the white rancher, united as one. It was a moment that dissolved old fears, revealing the truth that humanity lived not in skin or tradition, but in the choices people made when faced with another's suffering. One act of compassion had shifted the balance between conflict and peace. As the danger retreated, scattering back into the desert's distant folds, James felt the world settle into a calm unlike any he had ever known. Nahaya turned to him, her massive form silhouetted in the dawn. "Water gave me strength," she said softly. "But your kindness gave us all something greater." "What's that?" James asked. "A chance," she replied. "A chance to remember that even in times of fear, a single human heart can choose hope." James smiled, small, genuine, and full of something he hadn't felt in years. "Any man would have done the same," he said. "No," Nahaya answered gently. "Only a good one." As the warriors departed, leaving a protective blessing etched into the sand, James felt his ranch no longer stood alone in the vast desert. Because the world had shown him something profound. That humanity, when offered freely, binds people together stronger than fear ever could. And though he had expected nothing in return, he had gained something priceless, a reminder that kindness, even in the smallest form, can ripple beyond imagination and change the course of many lives. The morning that began with 399 warriors surrounding his ranch ended with a quiet warmth in his heart, the kind only found when strangers choose to see each other not as enemies but as human beings worthy of care. And for the rest of his days, whenever he filled a bucket from the well, he remembered the night he offered water to a weary stranger, and discovered just how powerful a simple act of compassion could be.